The Rev Kenneth Smyth, 1926 to 2017. Good afternoon. We're back up at Drumbo Presbyterian Church, and we're not up to video the church, even though it's quite historic. We're up to video a wee video tribute of a wonderful man who was minister of this church for quite a number of years, and I'm referring to Rev Kenneth Smyth, who was one of my favourite people of all time. Rev Smyth was 91, I believe, whenever he passed away over the summer. He had spent the previous number of years at some nursing home, and prior to that I visited him in Kirk House, and unfortunately we were away on holiday over July whenever he died, so I wasn't at his funeral. I didn't realise he had died, and I called into some nursing home but to receive the news of his death. I don't actually know where he's buried in the churchyard, so we'll just have to go back here and find his grave. This is Drumbo Presbyterian Church, and this is the historic graveyard, and this is the round tower. That's actually very historic as well, and it's a beautiful setting overlooking Belfast, just down beyond there. Rev Smyth first came into the ministry, I believe, in 1952, and he served in Buncrana and a place called Burt. It was a joint charge, and he served there for 3 years, and then he moved to Glasstreet Presbyterian Church from 1955 to 1963. And he came to Drumbo in 1963, and he served out his years there. He must have loved this place because he never moved on from it, and he was well respected and very, very much loved by the congregation. And so he served here from 1963 through to 1993, 30 years. And he retired, and then served some years with his wife, and then she, as I say, died in 2008, and he went into Kirk House, and also then in his last year into some nursing home. I first came across Rev Smyth whenever I was a young teacher. Very wet behind the ears at Newtownbreda High School. I came to Newtownbreda High School, I think it was about 1977, 78 or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But there was Rev Smyth. He appointed me. He was a chairman of the Board of Governors, and it was Bert Lind was the head teacher at that particular time. And then Bert Lind retired, and Rev Smyth remained as chairman of the Board of Governors, and Bert Lind was the man to take over him was Hubert Ruddle, and those were good times. They were fun times, and Rev Smyth just had he made you feel so much at home as a young teacher, and he certainly kept my feet on the straight and narrow. He would come alongside you and he would have a quiet word in your ear, because I was a wee bit wayward, as you might imagine, and he would have a quiet word, and he would tell you how much the school appreciated you, and there was never a reprimand as such. It was just a quiet word of fatherly advice, and I certainly appreciated that. Reverend Smyth was a jovial man. There was absolutely no pomp and ceremony or anything like that with Reverend Smyth. He was such a down-to-earth character, and he certainly was a character. He always made you smile, and foolish people thought, you know, that he was just a joker and all the rest of it, but actually in behind all that was a very, very clever and very, very astute man, and a man who was loyal to you and stuck by you, and I really appreciated him. I didn't, the first time it really struck me that this man was something else. This man was a righteous, godly man, and a very, very wise person. The first time it really hit home to me was whenever I heard him speak at a funeral of a father of one of my pupils, and I have never heard anyone preach like he did. It was absolutely amazing, and it was just so, it was brilliant. The funeral oration that he gave on that particular day, and I said to myself, this is a man, a righteous, godly man who needs to be listened to. But in latter years, our paths diverged, or our paths went away from each other, and I didn't see him for many years. I heard that he had retired from the ministry, and I came across him down at Cherry Valley, and he was in Kirk House, so I started to visit him. And Reverend Smyth, whenever I called to see him, he was always full of stories. He loved telling stories, and I told him that I had made a video or two of the tower that's just behind me, and he knew the history of the church, and he knew the history of the round tower here and all before it. He told me about meeting Blair Main twice, and he said, now Reverend Smyth was a big man. He played rugby. He was no soft touch, and he met Blair Main, and the first time he met Blair Main was Blair Main challenged him to an arm wrestle. So Reverend Smyth told me that, you know, he took the strain, and poof, Blair Main just had him in 2 seconds. He says the man's hands were like shovels. So he told me all about that, and then he told me whenever he was in Burt and Buncrana serving as minister, his treasurer was a Mrs. Montgomery, and he told me he was one day visiting with Mrs. Montgomery, and heard a rap at the door, or saw the garden gate, and a figure come through the garden gate, and just arriving, and Mrs. Montgomery said, "Oh, Reverend Smyth, would you like to meet my son?" And Reverend Smyth, of course, said yes, and she said, "He's just coming in now." And who should walk through the door but Field Marshal Montgomery. So Reverend Smyth met with Field Marshal Montgomery, and Reverend Smyth, he was full of stories and full of passion and so full of enthusiasm whenever he was telling you these things. He told me about his daughter-in-law, and he had a picture up on the mantelpiece of Kirk House, and it showed his daughter-in-law, and she was standing, and he says, "Go and look at that, go and look at that." And I got up, and there's the daughter-in-law, I don't know the girl's name, standing with her arms around the members, the four remaining members of the Rolling Stones. And I just could not believe this. This was hilarious, that Reverend Smyth's daughter-in-law, she actually turned out to be the financial advisor to the Rolling Stones, and I believe she still might be that financial advisor. But he said that she was, that's what she was. But anyway, he says, this was about 2 weeks before I had called. He says, you know, Tom, I had a phone call. And a phone call, he said, one Friday afternoon, there was a phone call came through, and I lifted the receiver, he said, and I said, Reverend Smyth here, and the person on the other end said, yes, this is Ronnie. And Reverend Smyth said, Ronnie? Who's Ronnie? And the person said, it's Ronnie Woods. And Reverend Smyth said, Ronnie Woods? Ronnie Woods out of the Rolling Stones. Oh, said Reverend Smyth. And Ronnie Woods actually was phoning him because he had misplaced Reverend Smyth's daughter-in-law's phone number, and he wondered whether Reverend Smyth had it. So there was Reverend Smyth there was Reverend Smyth talking away to Ronnie Wood out of the Rolling Stones, and Reverend Smyth was quick off the mark as usual, very quick off the mark. And he said just before the phone conversation ended, he said, Ronnie, I was just at my church service on Sunday. Do you ever go to church, Ronnie? So that's my wee tribute to Reverend Smyth. He kept my feet on the straight and narrow, and I owe an awful lot to Reverend Kenneth Smyth, as do many people up in Drumbo and far beyond. This man's influence has spread far and wide, and if anyone could not see the depth of this man and the godliness of this man, they were stupid. I always look for people who inspire me, who inspire me to be better and do better, and this man certainly did, and I for one sadly miss him. Great man.